Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between podcast. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and medium, and on this show, we discuss life, death, consciousness, and what it all means. Today, I have Dr. Tobin Hart back again. Dr. Hart is a father, partner, author, and spiritual ally. Professionally, he is a professor in a most unusual psychology department at the University of West Georgia. This department is a radical place where knowledge, wisdom, and even love are on the menu as we explore the depth of consciousness and society. He is also the co-founder and chair of the ChildSpirit Institute, a non-for-profit educational and research hub dedicated to understanding and nurturing the spirituality of children and adults. And today, Dr. Hart is back with us on the show to talk about just this topic, spirituality and children. So welcome back.
Thank you, Amy.
So we're going to jump into this concept of children and spirituality. And you've had a long interest in this, starting with your own child. So can you talk about what sort of opened you up to children and spirituality?
I always liked both of those things, but I never put them together until one night when my then about 6-year-old was going to bed, and I was tucking her in, and she a party girl who always wanted to stay up a little bit later, asked me a question about the book that was under my arm. It was a developmental psychology textbook with a picture of a child on it. And she said, "Dad, what are you reading a kid's book for?" And I said, "It's not a kid's book. It's a book about children, things like what they like to do, how they think, this kind of thing." And without missing a beat, lying in her bed at bedtime, she said, "You mean like seeing angels?" And of course, this was the last thing that this or any developmental psychology textbook was about. But I said, "Sure, it could be about things like that." And she said, "Well, I see my angel." And I said, "You do?" And it's funny, she had mentioned this kind of thing a couple times over the previous 6 months, and I hadn't taken a bait. I thought, again, this was a girl who wanted to stay up a little later, and I thought, oh, great, a child's fantasy. But this night, as a good psychologist and researcher, I took the bait. I said, "Do you see her now?" And she said, "Just a minute." And she lied back on her bed, surrounded by this forest of stuffed animals. And she started to take in these deep rhythmic breaths with her eyes closed, and started to move her spine from side to side, as if trying to get it in the right spot. Now, mind you, at that time, she had not seen anybody do yoga or meditate that I know of. We didn't talk about angels in our household. This wasn't the kind of thing that was regular fodder for us as a family. I had no idea what she was doing. Clearly, she knew exactly what she was doing. About maybe 3 or 4 minutes later, and she said, still eyes closed, dreamy voice, lying on the bed, she said, "Okay, I can see her now." And I said, "Okay, what'd she look like?" And I'm standing up still with this book under my arm. And she said, "Well, it looks like she's got glowy lipstick and makeup on. But she doesn't. It's just her." And I said, "Can I talk to your angel?" And again, I thought, great, kids' fantasy, this is terrific. And she said, again, eyes closed, "Why?" And I said, "Well, I'm interested in things like this." And she paused for a moment as if checking out an answer. And she said, "My angel knows your angel. They're old friends." Oh. And in that moment, tears came to my eyes. My heart started to swell. And I really didn't know what was going on. But, the body registers things before the mind does. And so my body knew something special was going on. So at this point, I sat down on the bed, sitting up straight, mind you, because there was something about this that really called me to be at attention. And so we proceeded to have this conversation, Haley and I guess her angel and I, for the next 10 or 15 minutes. And she spoke with a kind of profundity that I don't hear from the wisest adults I know, much less from a 6.5-year-old. And it wasn't the kind of profundity that was complex. It was sort of cutting to the heart of things. For example, Aquinas says that wisdom is seeing into the heart of something, or seeing from a greater height. And her comments were like that. They were really remarkably on target. And anyway, so at one point she started giving me advice about something I was working on, and this was not something she knew about, and hardly I had admitted it. And again, it was just this remarkable sort of event. We went on for a few more minutes, and finally at the end, I didn't want her to go to sleep, but it looked like it was time. And she then, I said, is there anything else your angel would like to say to me? Paused again, still eyes closed, and she said, children talk to their angels. I gave her a bigger hug and kiss, and left the room and got a pad of paper and took this down as verbatim as I could. And this led to the strangest sort of research project that I've had, and it's gone on now in some ways for more than 20 years. But it was, following these threads of conversation and stories. And what was most remarkable is people began to pop out of the pavement. Somebody would say, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I need to, on an airplane, I don't know why I need to tell you this, but I want to tell you about this thing with my children, or this thing that happened to me as a child. My wife started to tell me something that happened to her at 4 or 5. We got a call, and within 24 hours, happened to be visiting this place where an 11-year-old girl, and anyway, it was this remarkable sort of ride to try to understand this. And when talking to this 11-year-old girl a few days after this with my daughter, I asked this girl, I said, well, what am I here talking to you about? She paused for a minute. She was very intuitive, and she said, you are to write a book about a book for these children and for your children. And in fact, that's what we did within a couple of years, was to write this book about children's spiritual life. So anyway, so that's that's how things took a turn into exploring this, what was pretty uncharted territory of children's spiritual world.
And what does that spiritual world typically look like? Because as you were talking, one of the things I was thinking about was how we think about imaginary friends. And it kind of begs the question, what are they really? Are they imaginary friends, or are they perhaps there? We just don't see them.
Yeah. So I think children have potentially a variety of different children have different kinds of imaginary friends sometimes. And in fact, imaginary friends have gotten a new lease on life in the last dozen years or so. Up until that point, they were often dismissed, or often a telltale for a clinician as a child having a problem. Fortunately, there's been some nice work that says, well, wait a minute. This is a way for a child to have a dialogue about concerns that they have. And therefore, this is a really good ally. And it doesn't matter whether it's real or imagined. It's a way for children to work out problems. And that's primarily what many imaginary friends serve the function of. Test it out, work it out, think it out kind of thing in this kind of dialogue. On the other hand, there are these experiences, and I count my daughters as one of them, and I've found many, many others, of this idea of seeing the invisible, something that seems to be tapping or accessing another dimension. And it ranges from ghosts to angels to entities to whatever. And I'm a pretty, grounded and straight guy, but boy, this has really helped me to appreciate the multidimensional nature of reality. And that for many kids, and for example, I know many children with tremendously credible and verifiable cases of finding, let's call them ghosts, people who have died, for example, and without the child's knowing, they were able to tune into this location They might have been in the next room or this building for the first time, and they can describe this person, and yet the person has been deceased for 10 years or 100 years. And yet we can find they wouldn't have any way of knowing that, and yet we can verify this based on what's going on. So there's so many things that are working in this other world, and for some children, this is a tremendous gift, and it can be overwhelming as well.
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm. So what else? What are the phenomena that you see? You talk about this in your article, I imagine also in the book, about how kids express spirituality, and what as parents we can be looking for to foster that, because I think it's important to foster that connection. I think obviously this is my bias, but it broadens the way that you see the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and again, this idea of, a dramatic encounter with an angel or a scary one with a ghost or something is just one of many kinds of experiences. And, maybe the most important and most profound are moments of wonder. So a child and seeing the ocean for the first time, or seeing an elephant up close, or even a young child having a bite of ice cream for the first time. These are moments of absolute awe and wonder. And what we know from the literature on spirituality and on mysticism is that you really couldn't distinguish the accounts of a children's account of wonder or awe from that of a recognized saint or a mystic. The descriptions are virtually identical in terms of content, and so children have moments of wonder and awe all the time, and they are transformative and at least transcendent. That is, they show them a world of hope. They show them something greater than themselves. They show them something greater than the stock market and the business world, this kind of thing. And so it's in many ways part of the turn in the culture these days that we're noticing a re-enchantment of the world. We have things like deep ecology and sensitivity to animals and to the natural world in a way that we didn't before. Apollo 11 astronaut Edgar Mitchell comes back, as virtually every astronaut comes back from being out of the gravitational pull, and they say, "Wow, I see the Earth as this living being almost, or at least this complete thing, and therefore we need to think a little differently. It's not just a collection of objects. Our goal should be, as Thomas Berry says, to see the world as a communion of subjects." And children have this particular, what Zen would call beginner's mind, this ability to just see things as if for the first time and appreciate them without much preordained kind of value that says, "Wow, that grasshopper is incredible. Did you see that?" kind of thing. And so long as we can keep wonder alive in that, then we keep spirituality alive. So that would be one thing. So wonder. Another is wondering. And that is, we normally think of children as not having the capacity to ask big questions. What are we here for? What's life about? What am I to do? What's the meaning of this? What's real? What's not real? These are the fundamental questions of all of religion and all of philosophy. And you can see these questions being asked in a 5-year-old. Why? Right?
I know. I have a 5-year-old.
Yeah. And it's
a lot of questions I can't answer.
and so what it says is that children are natural philosophers. These questions about how do you know that? One of my daughters used to say that, right? And so, that's epistemology. And what's real? That's cosmology or ontology. These are all of the things that philosophy tries to go for is what children can do really naturally. And so to be able to give, as a parent, to be able to give space, when a child asks a question like that, it's like saying, "Hey, sit with me at this table of the great thing and let's dive in together." They don't need tidy answers. In fact, that's often insulting. And children often describe retrospectively, they'll say, nobody would take my questions seriously. And it wasn't that I wanted an answer, even though I did. I wanted somebody to take it seriously. I want to have a conversation about it. I want to see ideas pop up about it because I've got my own, So that's what children are inviting us to in this wondering. So wonder and wondering are two. Another is what I call between you and me. And that is this empathic connection, this neurological looping and linking that we know is very real these days. And this is an ability to have what Martin Buber would call a relational spirituality. So rather than going up, let's say, or going down in this sort of earth-friendly spirituality, this is what we might call extended spirituality or relational spirituality, in which we're going out to another and making conversation and maybe even community and maybe even communion with the other. And it doesn't just have to be another person. It could be the natural world. It could be a pet. It could even be an idea in which we find this profound resonance with the other. And this puts us in a kind of frequency lock, right? It's like, I'm humming with you. I'm vibrating with you. I get it. And so that's a kind of extended spirituality, I would argue. So wondering, wonder, and between you and me. And then this other is like the angels. It would be this idea of seeing the invisible, whether it be ghosts or angels or
there was a book written about the kid who saw Jesus, right, a couple years ago, I think.
Yes, and I think there's some questions about that book, that particular book you're referring to. But Eben Alexander, a neurosurgeon from
he was on the show a while back.
Oh, great! Yeah, from Atlanta. He's like my neighbor down the road here, right? He had his own angel experiences. So there's so many sort of credible accounts of this, and also Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia Medical School, did these very dull but very wonderful books on what he called, one of them's called 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation. And they're about children apparently describing things that they couldn't have any knowledge of, and that he counts them as possible past lives. There may be other ways to make sense of it. For example, one could tune into a particular frequency of being, and not have to have actually lived that past life. But anyway, it makes a really credible case for knowing something that you have no other way of knowing, So seeing the invisible. And the last one is what I would call wisdom, that Black Elk, the great Lakota Sioux Native American elder who led his people through the genocide in the States. He says, grown men may learn from little children because the little hearts of little children are pure. If you see a child come into a room, an infant, you'll often find adults change their pitch. Oh, look at the baby! There's something about the purity of that opens us up, right? And there's something about the purity of a sometimes children will stare at people and you'll say, oh, don't stare at that person who's missing his arm, or don't stare at that person and yet the child is really sort of trying to zero in some way and just understand. And there's a way in which the purity and the innocence of that insight actually may have more to do with wisdom than our sort of constructed and elaborated and scientized kind of thing. For example, the great religionist Abraham Heschel, he says, the beginning of wisdom is wonder, and the beginning of wonder is awe. And it's this capacity for, again, beginner's mind, for seeing things freshly, that may actually add to this kind of wisdom of children. Just as my daughter gave me advice at 6.5 years old that I have no idea where it came from, and yet there it is. So,
and what age does this turn off? so to say.
Yeah, and parents often will say, when they've got a 6-year-old and they see the wonder of this, and they'll say, wow, I don't want them to lose their spirituality. I don't want them to lose their connection. What do we do? Do we go to church or synagogue or mosque? Do we do something else? What do we do? So it looks like the developmental arc, and it's been fun to both be with people at different ages over this, but also to see, even in my own children, to have looked at this for 25 years now, and to see that developmental arc, what happens. And it's quite natural for some of this to get recessive, that is, to go to the background, particularly as the individual self develops. And it's really important for that sense of self to develop. Who am I? What am I as an individual? One of the troubles, though, is that we've assumed that the self is this entirely independent thing. And these days, thanks to quantum mechanics and thanks to our understanding of the world as an interdependent organism, or at least parts of that, we begin to say, wow, maybe we're not so independent. Maybe that the self is always a self in relation. Always a self in relation to other people, to our history, to our family, to the natural world. We're an animal, this kind of thing. And so maybe the self isn't so stiffly bounded. So it's not unusual for a 7-year-old to begin to lose some of that wide openness, a 6-year-old even, to lose some of that wide openness. 5, 6, 7 is a great age because they can both articulate what's going on and also still be open to it. After that point, they can still articulate it, but sometimes it sort of goes to the background as this more immediate sort of sense of self-development comes forward. But the person who's deeply empathic is still going to be empathic. And so the challenge is to have a self, I think, but also have these tools to say, let me see if I can stay in touch with my sense of wonder. Let me see if I can stay in touch with innocence. Can I find spaces of silence, for example? This is one of the things that goes first in a 7-year-old in school, or a 6-year-old, right? Space of silence between excessive screen time, people talking at me, my own cell phone that I'm hoping I'll get in next birthday, that kind of thing. It's like, wow, there's no downtime. And if there's no downtime, if there's no silent time, if there's no time in nature, for example, then there's our connection with wonder really starts to recede. So anyway, in answer to the question, not unusual to see it sort of abate a little bit around 8, that kind of thing. But also there's some ways that we really can keep our questions about, what do you think we're here for? How's your life going? This kind of thing. What do you know? This is part of what, as a parent or a teacher, can keep it alive.
Yeah. And I think, I have a 5-year-old, and his questions are always so really profound. If you listen, the other day we were driving and he was just staring out the window and we passed a cemetery. And he just said, Mom, I'm not ready to die yet. And I thought, well, good, because I'm not ready for you to die yet. And I said, I know, buddy, I don't want that to happen right now either. I just love you too much. And it's just like to think about the connections that they make that are so unfiltered and raw and beautiful and really what I think we all feel, and they just put words to without the filter of a frontal lobe that's saying, oh, I shouldn't say that, and people will think I'm weird if I say something like that. They just kind of put it all out there, and it's just so beautiful to see if you can be present enough to see it. And there's plenty of times where I'm sure I miss it, but
yeah, it's a beautiful description of that, right? And we just, again, it just isn't socially acceptable and to have those deep existential questions. It's uncomfortable, and yet that's exactly what keeps it alive, is to know you've got other people who are also asking the questions. You're not an alien. You've got community.
Well, and sometimes I'll even play with that with them, obviously given kind of my my coming out of this podcast and talking more about some of these issues, it's become very commonplace in my home to talk about, what happens when we die. My kids joke that I have the library of death, they call it, because everything I'm reading seems to be about death for the podcast. And it's become really part of how we talk about things. And so it's opened up a whole world of conversation. My middle son is really interested in the Holocaust. And so that has been a really profound experience, talking about that in contrast with the work I'm doing. And, have people who experienced the Holocaust come back and talked about it in another life. And, all of these interesting questions that I hope has allowed for them to have more wonder and curiosity and not cut it off, because I feel like it does on some level just get nixed for a lot of kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And our own difficulty tolerating talking about some of these existential issues.
And again, not every kid is sort of going there either. That's, one of the interesting things is that there's this range, right? So some kids are deeply empathic, and some kids are the natural philosophers, and some kids have this wisdom, and other kids are really into, find wonder through sports or whatever. So it's really the kind of uniqueness of, their spiritual style, I would even say, that's really fun to kind of to draw out a little bit and to notice as we go. And often that provides, in some of our research, we looked at autobiographical accounts of historic figures, and surprisingly, what's been missed is that their most profound spiritual moments and the magic that led to the gateway of their entire life as a spiritual being was in childhood. Teilhard de Chardin, the great Jesuit sage, at 6 or 7, Saint Catherine of Siena, all these folks had these experiences as children and described them in their autobiographies, but we didn't pay any attention to them. So often the seed is already planted in someone.
Well, another very interesting interview. So thank you. And where can people find your work if they're interested?
The book, The Secret Spiritual World of Children, is available and has been around for a little while on Amazon or any other website. And
is there any other website at this point?
And we have a website called ChildSpirit, one word, .org or .net, ChildSpirit. And although it's been a little neglected, I think there's some links to some other resources there as well.
And if they want to find you directly, your website?
I can't even remember.
I'll find it. I'll put it in my show notes for people.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think they can find through the ChildSpirit website. There's also a book for, children who have grown up. It's called The Four Virtues. The fourvirtues.org. There is a website there with some useful information and contact information on me as well. So,
okay, great. Yeah. Well, thank you. And thank you for the research you're doing and for opening up really the world of children and spirituality, because I know you were one of the people at the forefront of that. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Amy.
Thanks for your time. Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Curious about what comes next and what it all means? You can subscribe on iTunes. Just go to podcasts and find Life, Death, and the Space Between and hit subscribe. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Dr. Amy Robbins. Ask me any questions you might have, let me know what else you'd love to hear about, or just share your story. I can't wait to hear from you.